I'm Jeff Reynar, and this morning Mike Ammerlaan and I, he'll come up about halfway through, are going to talk to you about smart tags. And we're going to give you a quick overview. I know you've seen some demos yesterday, and then move into how you actually develop these things and exploit this technology for yourselves. So to start off, you can imagine today being in a large organization and receiving a mail message that says something like this. Hey Jeff, what do you know about this company Fabricam Incorporated? Robert Brown thinks we should drop their model AXY 1125 from our catalog. So if you'd gotten that message today, you might do a number of things. Maybe you'd look up some information about Fabricam. Maybe check to see how well their products were selling within your organization. Maybe you'd look them up on the web to see how they're doing financially. Gosh, is this company going to go out of business? Is that what Robert's worried about? Maybe you'd go talk to Robert Brown, maybe by sending him some email, an instant message. Maybe you'd want to get some information about this fellow. Is he a real booster of someone else's solution in this area in the company? Is that what he's selling really well? Is that why he thinks Fabricam should be dropped? Maybe you need information about that particular model, simply to see how well are we selling? How much do we make each time we sell one of these? Do we have a lot on hand? And the thing that all of these things have in common is that you can think about starting each of these actions, whether it's talking to Robert or looking up information about this product or company, from some nugget of data that's in this message. Something like Fabricam or Robert Brown or AXY 1125. And the set of actions that you can do, talking to Robert, emailing Robert, instant messaging Robert, are really gated by some information about that string in that document. It's the fact that Robert is a person. And that's something that you, as a human being, know when you read this message. But today, this message is completely dead. It's just text. If you want to send Robert Brown mail, what you can do is go to Outlook, type Robert Brown's name in the to line of a message, contact him that way. But what we want to get to with smart tags is something much richer. We want to bring these documents to life and make the nuggets of data that you recognize have information associated with them because of the category that they're in, whether it's a company name, a person's name, the name of a particular part or product. We want to annotate documents with those things automatically while documents are created. And as a result of that annotation, which in and of itself probably isn't that interesting, offer you as the end user, the person who's writing that document, the person who's reading that document, a set of actions, things that you can do because of the label that's been applied. So you can interact with information about Fabricam, maybe get a report about that company from a website, maybe get news about that company, check your own sales database, maybe interact with Robert in some way, instant messaging, check his sales history in your local sales database. Do all sorts of things that can be done both internally, within your firewall, in your organization, on your local machine, or out on the web. So we want to enable this by doing two things. Recognizing data automatically in your documents and in an extensible way so that you can come along and define for your organization or purchasers of your software labels like part number, person, company name. And then in the second half of the feature, associating with those labels a set of actions that your users are doing today, but that they're doing by cut and paste or by retyping. They're doing in tedious ways and error-prone ways. So we want to automate these things and save users time. And you can think about this in a couple of different ways. You can think about it as making documents somewhat object-oriented. The nuggets of information in those documents have actions associated with them. They're objects. The objects have actions. You can also think about this as being a real extension of the hyperlink. The hyperlink today is something that does one thing, and it does it really well. Takes you out to the web. Maybe it's your intranet, but it still opens a browser window, maybe passes some data to a website. There's some limitations with that. You can't richly interact with a client application on the user's machine. You can't pass a plethora of data out to a particular website or web service. Other limitations, like the fact that you can only have one hyperlink per string. And when you click on a hyperlink, you don't really know what that hyperlink's going to do. And even if you know what it's going to do, the fact that there's only one is a big limitation. You can't, for a person's name, have a hyperlink that instant messages with them as well as sends them email as well as does something else. So these are a couple things that smart tags provide to extend the hyperlink. And the other thing that smart tags provide that really richly extends the hyperlink is that hyperlinks are things that today you either type in an HTTP address or select some text and add a hyperlink to text that isn't itself a URL. But But with smart tags, this is going to happen seamlessly and automatically on your machine. Background thread gets used while you're typing in a document. These things are being recognized by components on your machine. So what exactly is this smart tag? It's a really simple thing. It's just an XML tag that's applied to data, a string in a Word document, a cell in Excel. And in addition to that label, which is just an XML tag, you can have arbitrary metadata. So I might be in an Excel spreadsheet looking at my investments and want Microsoft to be treated as a stock ticker symbol. The reason I might want that is so that I can interact with a website and get information about how Microsoft is doing. In that case, the MSFT itself is probably enough information for the website. The website can look up the information about Microsoft, I can get company news, all these sorts of things. But in other cases, the action that I might want to do might need a richer amount of data. It might be useful if I'm interested in looking up information about one of the albums in my CD collection, because that would enable actions like look at other albums that this band has produced, or let me get reviews of music that people who like music by that band also like. So you can embed arbitrary metadata in addition to the XML tag. So in Office XP, there are a number of applications that have been enabled for smart tags. First one is Word. So while you're typing in a Word document or creating a mail message with Word, your text will be labeled with smart tags. You'll have the opportunity to interact with those smart tags, perform actions on them while you're writing the document. Outlook as well. HTML mail. You author that mail with Word. You, as the author of the mail, are able to use smart tags to help you in the process of creating the mail. But then when you send the mail to someone else, they're able to use the smart tags as well. They travel in the HTML message. They're able to act on them in the viewer of that message within the context of Outlook. Excel. Essentially the same situation as Word. While you're typing in Excel, your text is being passed off to this collection of components that recognize and apply labels. And you have the set of actions as well. The only difference really is that in Excel this is off by default. So if you go home and want to play with this, you just have to turn the feature on. Internet Explorer. We also built a component that enables smart tag actions within the browser that ships with Office XP. And as a result, if you take a document in Word or an Excel spreadsheet, save it out to HTML, view it in the web browser, you'll be able to interact with smart tags in the same way that you would, roughly speaking, in Word or Excel in the first place. The story gets a little richer when it comes to the version of Internet Explorer that's in IE6 in Windows XP. And that's because the browser then is enabled to recognize smart tags when you view web pages. So if you view a web page authored by someone else who didn't have the collection of smart tag components that you have, you'll still benefit from those because they'll run while you're viewing the web page. So I'm going to give you a real quick demo. I know Anders Brown has showed you some of these things yesterday, and that Mike is later on in this presentation going to show you some more. But what I would just want to show you is the fact that when you're in Word, this happens in the background, and then when you save out the document or view it in Internet Explorer, things are there in essentially the same way. So I'm going to switch over to Word here. And you can imagine that maybe I'm creating a letter or creating a document or a web page that I'm going to host internally, which will refer to contact information for a person. And to do this, I might type the person's name. And let me just make this a little bit larger. And having typed Robert Brown here, you can see that it now has a dotted purple underline on it. And that's because when I finished typing it, that text, Robert Brown, was passed off on a background thread to the collection of recognizers that were installed. So they had the opportunity to look at that text, scrutinize it, and figure out whether there was a label that they wanted to apply. So in this case, a recognizer came along that said, Robert Brown. That's a person's name. And as a result of that person label being applied, there's now this list of actions that are on this menu because of the fact that that's a person. So I can send Robert mail, I can schedule a meeting with him, I can open his contact information in Outlook, I can add him to my contacts folder if he's not already there, I can insert his address. And what's on this menu is dynamic. So someone else can write another action for person, and that will appear here as well. So now I can't demo this since I'm not connected to an Exchange server, but I could have inserted Robert's address. And if I did, then it would appear below his address here. And you can see that this has also been smart tagged. So 123 Main Street, that's probably a place or an address. And sure enough, if I hover and click, you can see that it is, in fact, an address, and that there's a set of actions here that I can do with this address. I can add it to my contacts folder. I can get a map, which will go out to the web, to Expedia, and show me how to get to this location. I can even get driving directions. If I do the driving directions action, then I get some intermediate UI on my machine from which I can fill in where I'm starting from Microsoft, and I'm going to go to that address. And now, when I click OK, this information is stored away on my machine and will be used in the future, the next time I get driving directions. But this will just go out to the web, past my starting location and my ending location to a mapping site. And you can see, I'm not going to connect because I'm not actually connected to the internet, but this would give me the map, give me the driving directions that I need. So that's the story in Word. Works essentially the same in Excel, but it even works in the browser. So if I do web page preview or save this as an HTML file, then you can see that I'll have the same text. It will have the same sort of underline. The same sort of button appears when I hover. Roughly the same menu appears with a set of actions that's pertinent to Internet Explorer. In this case, I can't do insert address because IE is an editing environment in this case. So the set of actions is customizable based on the application as well. Do you need Office for that? You need to have the component that provides the functionality within IE, which ships with Office. So you do at this time need Office on your machine. The important thing about what I just showed you is not that Office XP ships with a handful of actions. Certainly the actions and the recognizers that we ship are useful. People are going to need to get maps. People are going to want to add people to their contacts folder. These are common scenarios. But the most important thing about this feature set, by far, is simply that it's extensible, that an ISV, someone in an IT department, any developer can extend this. And they can extend it in a couple ways. First, they can define their own types. And we've found that if you look at an organization, you can typically find a data type that's really integral to the way people in that organization work. Maybe it's case citations if you're a lawyer. Maybe it's chemical formulas if you're in the chemical industry. Maybe it's medical terms if you're a doctor. There's always something, and you have the task of being an anthropologist a little bit to figure out what that data type is and what sort of behavior, what sort of actions to enable for those data types. So that relates to the two components that you as a developer can provide once you've defined this type. So let's say you go off and define one for case citations, like a few people have done already. You can write a recognizer that recognizes case citations, maybe by looking for a particular pattern that cases fall into, or doing database lookup, that sort of thing. And secondly, you can provide actions for that, like checking the status of a case on the web, or adding a case citation to my document. It's important to point out that in addition to being able to define your own types, you can also leverage the ones that we ship recognizers for in Office. So you can extend people's names, times, dates, places, addresses, all of these things to the sort of data and the sort of actions that the users you're deploying Office for or building solutions for are interested in using. The smart tag architecture is relatively simple. There's a shared infrastructural component that's used by Word, by Excel, by Internet Explorer. And essentially, the behavior in these three places is the same. A couple important things to point out about the way you can develop against this. First of all, that there are two interfaces. There's iSmartTag Recognizer and iSmartTag Action. And the way you divvy up your components is up to you. You can implement both of them in one DLL. You can implement only the recognizer side of things if you want to maybe use this for a knowledge management scenario rather than actions. You can implement only the action interface if you just want to extend one of the types that we ship recognizers for in Office. The other thing to mention on this slide is that Word has a bit of a leg up over Excel right now in that some of the things that we recognize, times, addresses, dates, are actually recognized by the Word grammar checker. So they're recognized in the context of Word only. So having told you quickly about what the architecture is, let me tell you briefly, in sort of overview fashion before Mike really dives into it, how you go about using these things yourself. So if you want to do recognition of data, you really have two options. First option is you can take the really simple route, which takes literally a few minutes. If you want to recognize a list of items, all you have to do is specify that list in an XML file. And that's because there's a recognizer that ships with Office XP, which uses that XML file to apply the label that you've chosen and also specified in that XML file. If you want to do something more powerful than just do list recognition, maybe it's some sort of custom pattern matching. My part numbers maybe always adhere to a particular form, like the letter X followed by 4 digits. I could write maybe a regular expression to recognize that. Or maybe you want to do some form of database lookup, like check on a SQL database inside the firewall whether this is a product that we sell or whether this is an account number, that sort of thing. You can do all of that by implementing the iSmartTag recognizer interface, using VB, using C++. To do this, you have the full power of COM at your disposal. If you can do it in a COM object, you can do it in a recognizer. The second half of the feature is building the actions. So once your data has been recognized, you have the opportunity to give these actions to users. And again, like the recognizer situation, there's a sort of two-tier story. You can specify actions in an XML file. Those actions are limited in the sense that they can take you out to the web or to an HTTP site within your internet or within your intranet. But they can't do anything richer than open the web browser. They can pass in information about what string was labeled, but that's all you can specify in an XML file. If you want to do something richer, like interact with an application on the client machine through automation or interact with a database, something like that, you can implement the iSmartTag action interface, again, VB, C++, full power of COM at your disposal. And the important thing to point out about this is that in addition to getting the text that's been labeled, these actions get a hook into the object model of the application where the labeling was done. So you have the opportunity to go back and modify the document as the result of an action. So you can do things like insert a person's address, or insert a bibliography entry into Word, or insert a web query into Excel, that sort of thing. So these things do require client-side code. These are DLLs that provide this sort of functionality. And so one of the big barriers is getting the code onto the user's machine. And we've done one thing to help with this distribution story, which is that there's a special kind of metadata that a recognizer can embed in a document, and that's called the download URL. And this is just a URL, HTTP address on the web, inside your firewall, your choice, that points to a location where a download package is hosted. So the scenario for this is, imagine I have one collection of SmartTag stuff. Maybe it's to recognize chemical symbols. And I write some documents and exchange them with other people. Maybe they're mail messages, maybe they're spreadsheets, whatever. That person doesn't necessarily have that same collection of SmartTag stuff. So they won't have the same set of actions that I have on my machine. But they will have one action when they view the document, which is to check for new actions, which will take them out in the browser to that website and allow them to get the download package that's been provided, so that SmartTags can sort of distribute among the people who use the documents and need the actions fairly easily. So with that overview complete, I'm going to let Mike Ammerlaan come up here, and he's going to talk to you in much more depth about how you actually develop these things. So thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, so as Jeff mentioned, one of the top priorities for developing SmartTags was having a great extensibility story. To reiterate, the reason that we think that extensibility is really super important is that because the most interesting SmartTags for a person are going to be the ones that deal with the data that they work with. So for example, I'm a program manager, I deal on a product, and I have to deal with bugs in the product and their identifiers every single day. And that's data that's really important to me. So of course, a SmartTag that works with these bug identifiers is just really useful to me personally. But of course, outside of software companies in general, bug identifiers don't make a lot of sense. So really what's required is the ability to kind of extend it and make it easy so that people in their respective organizations can build contextual SmartTags that work really well. So before I get started into how you develop SmartTags, I'd like to first start off with a demo of an out-of-the-box SmartTag, stock ticker symbols. So let me start up Excel real quick. Okay. And let me maximize it and go to a different zoom. And what you'll see is I'm going to enter in some stock ticker symbols. And this is something that works out of the box. We recognize US stock ticker symbols. So I'll type in, of course, MSFT and maybe IBM and maybe Daimler Chrysler. And you can see that they get recognized within Excel, and they've got the annotations that you know now are SmartTags. So when I hover over them, I get some actions that work really well with SmartTags. I can take and go to Money Central and look up information about them, or I can insert some web data into my document. And this all happens out of the box. So when we tried to develop the recognizer and the technology for doing this, our first question was, well, how are we going to recognize stock ticker symbols? And we thought, well, maybe we can do an algorithm that just says, if I see something that's 3 letters or 4 letters and all in caps, then I can say, yeah, that's a stock ticker smart tag. Well, it turns out that there's issues there. You'd definitely start spamming your document, and the last thing that we really want is, for smart tags to turn into a feature that kind of annoys people and overpowers them. So we try to be smart about how we do recognition, and we also try to be smart about what's turned on out of the box, what's not turned on out of the box, so that users can make choices about the things that are interesting to them. But getting back to the problem of development, what we did was we refined our algorithm some and said, okay, obviously 3 and 4 character letters being recognized is not going to work at all. So what we really need is a technology that allows us to get stock ticker symbols downloaded onto a user's machine and allows them to do recognition with it and also use URLs that take them to Money Central. And what we thought was, well, this is something that a lot of people will want. A lot of people have just static lists of things, and they have some URLs that go with them, and they want to create smart tags based on that. And rather than having maybe a proprietary solution that just works in the case of stock ticker symbols, maybe we should develop a solution that works at a more generic level, that can take lists of terms and some actions that work with them, and then have them recognized within the product. And so what we've done is come up with a tool called Microsoft Office Smart Tag List, which is an out-of-the-box Smart Tag DLL. And what Microsoft Office Smart Tag List, or MOSTL, or MOSL, or depending on how you pronounce it, does for you is it takes an XML file that's placed into a directory. Now that XML file specifies 2 things, and you can specify one or the other or both. It can specify a list of terms to recognize in your document, and it can also specify some actions that just take you out to websites. So, we don't expose the full power of the Smart Tag API there. You can't do things like open up Outlook. You can just really only open up URLs or, recognize simple lists of terms. But the beauty is, of course, is that you don't have to write code, you don't have to deal with COM DLLs, and it's just really simple. So you can also specify with this list recognizer case-sensitive or case-insensitive terms, and it's also really, it has some pretty good performance in that it'll scale to a few thousand terms. Now, another feature that I mentioned of stock ticker symbols was that, of course, over time, certain companies go away and certain companies appear, and so thus new stock ticker symbols, move around and change. So another feature that we've built into MOSTL is that you can update them from the web. So what you can do in this XML file is specify some parameters about how it should do updates, and periodically, as you use the smart tag, it'll do some occasional checks to say, oh, is there a new file that contains new terms for me to download? Well, if so, I'll do that and drop it in. So let me give you a short code example of what this MOSTL list looks like. So first I'll switch to the file itself. And this is basically a MOSL list file. So at the top, you'll see some certain properties that concern what this smart tag list is all about. And what we've built here is a simple list of the employee names and email aliases of people in our company. And it's just a fictitious company. So at the top, of course, we just have a friendly name for this list, and we have a short description. And that's just fairly straightforward. Beneath this, we actually have some tags on our update strategy. So what you'll see here is we've got a lot of parameters for kind of modifying and dealing with updating. So first of all, we have this tag at the top that says, are you updatable? Well, yes, we are. Beneath that, we have a tag called auto update. Now what that specifies is does this file update automatically, or does the user have to click a button to trigger it? We actually used to have some user interface in the box for triggering an update automatically, that the user could push a button and it would force an update immediately. We don't have that in the box anymore, but we will put it on Office Update. So really, for now, auto update doesn't make a lot of sense because out of the box, all you can really do is auto update. We've got this notion of a checkpoint, which you can really think of as a version number for your list. So when we do an update, we'll go to a website and check the version number that the website has, and if that's greater than the version that's currently installed, we'll download it and install it. And finally, there's a URL there which says, which site should I go to, which in conjunction with update frequency, which specifies how often should I do that in numbers of minutes, basically tells the smart tag recognizer, how it should go about, connecting to a database and getting more data. So beneath that, we actually have the bulk of, what this list does. Auto updating is totally optional. You don't have to use it if you don't want, but these are the things that really are interesting for you when you are defining your smart tag list. So the most important thing that you'll see here is a comma-separated term list. So this basically specifies, the email aliases, let's say, of people that are in our company. So that way, maybe you can link them up to your, corporate database, or write some actions that integrate with Outlook, or just use some simple URL-based actions. One of the important things is that as specified, when you specify it this way, it'll do a case-insensitive search based on terms. If you want to do case-sensitive based searching, so that it's case sensitive, you'd want to put that in quotes. So that's the list of things that will get recognized. And finally, what you can do is associate some actions that take URLs with those terms that you've recognized. So here it's fairly straightforward. You specify a friendly caption for the smart tag action that's going to be supplied, and you specify the URL to go to. So one of the important things that you'll notice in this URL is that we've got a special kind of tag there called text. And what that means is what the action DLL will do is replace that value with the value of the cell or the smart tag. So that way you can build parameterized URLs that might take you to a special report page on your intranet site. So this in a nutshell is a smart tag list. So of course, if I go back to Excel where it's been loaded, you can basically see that if I enter Eric A in there, it'll recognize it. And when I select and hover over that, I'll get the action that I specified. So this is, in a nutshell, how you can build very simple smart tags that are still fairly useful, but don't require COM code. And of course, I'm not connected to the internet, so it doesn't load, but you can see that it did parameterize the URL by putting in Eric A for the name. So getting back to the slides, that's the simplest way that out of the box you can create smart tag DLLs. Moving up in complexity, you can imagine that sometimes, and oh, by the way, I actually have these as slides, but I'll skip through them, because I demoed them in MSE. Okay, so moving up in complexity, you can imagine that you might want to do something a little bit more advanced. So what I mentioned before was that as a program manager, I deal with bugs every day, and bugs that are in the product, bugs we need to fix, those kinds of things. And of course, bugs have unique identifiers. So Office 10 1234 means, hey, that's Office 10 bug 1234. And that connects to a database, and the database has all kinds of information and discussion and properties on that certain bug. So the way this works in Office applications is if I go back into Excel and just switch back to the sheet, you can see how this works. So if I enter in, for example, Office 10 bug 1234, that'll get recognized as a smart tag because I've built this COM DLL that's smart enough to say, if I see a certain key phrase like Office 10, which is fairly unique, and I see that's followed by a number, I think what I'll do is I'll recognize it as a smart tag. So what we've got here is really kind of an algorithm. Rather than a simple list, we've got an algorithm that says if I see something followed by something, I'm going to recognize that as a smart tag. And of course, I've also got some powerful actions associated with it. I could go to the bug report as a web page on an intranet site, which is pretty useful, but I could do something else, like, for example, open this bug in our Win32 client that shows you more information about the bug. I won't do that here because I'm not connected, but this is really key for us because we just live in this application every day. So the ability to jump to it quickly is really a big feature. Big feature. So how would you go about implementing a COM DLL that does these kinds of things? Because you want these actions that can open up Win32 applications, and you can you want to do algorithmic-based recognition. That really requires a COM DLL. So how do you go about implementing one of those? So in the Smart Tag SDK, which we're going to ship later this month, we have this simple sample called Simple Term. And it's, you can think of it as kind of like the hello world basic level of how you go about creating a smart tag. So what we've got here is a very simple demo of how you can go about creating the smart tag DLL. What this DLL will do is recognize some coffee product names, and it will associate some actions that do a simple job of just opening up Internet Explorer and passing in the URL. So of course, at the top of this DLL, our iSmartTag recognizer, we've got some terms here that we just want to recognize. That's fairly straightforward. Down here, you'll see kind of the bulk of what makes an iSmartTag an iSmartTag. So smart tags really have this interesting interface that I would kind of call a callback style interface, which means that as an application boots and wants to start talking to smart tag DLLs, what it'll do is it'll call into these DLLs and say, hey, what's your name and how many smart tags do you support? For the first action that you have, what's the caption for that so I can show it in the menu? This is really useful because it allows you to create very dynamic DLLs that can give you different lists of actions over time depending on depending on changes in the environment. So for example, maybe one day you want a DLL that supplies 4 actions because you've maybe MSFT is recognized as a stock ticker symbol, but maybe tomorrow you want to supply 6 actions and you want the DLL to be very dynamic. And by having a callback style interface, it's really up to the DLL at the time that the application boots to specify the kinds of actions that it wants. So the callback style interfaces that iSmartTag recognizers and iSmartTag actions are a little complex, but it really is useful in developing dynamic DLLs. So what you can see here is that right now we're just passing back some properties that are fairly basic. We're telling the host application, here's what my name is, here's the number of SmartTag DLLs that I support. And these properties in an iSmartTag recognizer are fairly straightforward. A key point is this right here, which is our SmartTag type. Jeff mentioned the whole notion of SmartTag types earlier, which is to say, I want to recognize Robert Brown as a person, where a person is a type for Robert Brown. And then on another level, actions are registered against person. And that's what we call a SmartTag type. Well, under the hood, a SmartTag type is constructed out of 2 things. It's constructed out of a namespace and followed by a tag name. This is to ensure that, for example, your definition of a stock ticker symbol doesn't necessarily collide with another company, let's say Schwab's definition of what a stock ticker symbol should look like. So it allows you to make sure that the actions that you want to define remain unique to your text. Now, going down, you'll finally see the bulk of what this recognizer does. And this is a method called iSmartTag recognizer recognize. And here it's fairly straightforward. We just want to do a simple lookup and parse through the text. And if we actually happen to find a match, we'll call back on the recognizer site a method called commit SmartTag. And what that basically says is for this run of text from characters 4 to characters 11, that's a coffee flavor latte or something. And that tells the application that it should go ahead and annotate it with some SmartTag information. So that's how the SmartTag recognizer is basically implemented. It's a lot of small one-off properties that are fairly straightforward, followed by your recognition engine, which is arbitrarily complex depending on what you want to do. In the case of RAID bugs, here you have this algorithm that says, I'm going to look for these key terms, and then look for a number after that, and then I'm going to call commit SmartTag if I find something. SmartTag actions are just very similar in their orientation. There's a little bit more of properties that they need to supply because they need to tell the host applications, hey, how many actions do I support? And what's a caption for action number 1? What's a caption for action number 2? Things like that. But it's fairly straightforward, and if you look down here, you'll see the same thing as the iSmartTag recognizer. Really, the bulk of what a SmartTag DLL does is contained in this method called iSmartTag action invoke verb. That contains all the logic you want to do whatever you would need to do to invoke the action correctly. So in this case, we just instantiate IE and pass in a URL. But you can do things like, for example, show modal dialogues. You can call into other applications. It's really it's COM, so it's arbitrarily complex as to what you can do, and that's the beauty of SmartTags. So that's really kind of in a nutshell what an implementation of the SmartTag DLL looks like. So if you see in the application how this works, I can just type in some coffee names, and sure enough, it gets recognized. And when I hover over the SmartTag, I get the action that I'm looking for. Again, very basic implementation of a SmartTag, but that's what one of the most useful things that I think will be to take the simple term example out of the SmartTag SDK and really just start with that as your template, and then you can add the properties and methods that you'd like, and customize the names, add more actions, and it's really easy to develop from there. So what about doing a little bit more complex types of interactions? So a lot of people have lists, but they're locked up in databases. Well, actually, that's certainly by design, because databases are flexible structures for storing lists. So what if you want to do some recognition based on a database? You might imagine how that might work, because you've got ADO. You might want to do a list recognizer and plug these things all together. Well, what we've included in the SmartTag SDK is a database sample. Now, we've given a kind of a broad overview of the database sample in the SDK, and I'll go into a little bit more detail of what that actually looks like, what the actual parts of it are. Really, the database sample is really kind of more of a good demo of COM integration than it is of SmartTags, because really the database sample is still fairly small, because we just use ADO to do all the stuff to do connect to a database and all the intelligence there. We instantiate a scripting.dictionary, which is basically a big hash table to do our kind of efficient cataloging of terms. And we use MSXML to parse a configuration file. So if I show you what this looks like, if I go back to Excel, I can enter in a Northwind customer ID. So imagine that you receive an invoice, for example, that has these kind of somewhat odd, like customer IDs that, when you first look at it, you don't really know what ALF key means, but you know it's a customer, but you don't know whether it's, one customer or another. And what we're doing here is we're recognizing based on that customer ID. So when I hover over the smart tag, I can do some more powerful actions. Like maybe I want to start building a report on this company and I want to insert some data about it into the document. So I can select this action, and what it'll do is it'll insert the name of the customer there. That's a fairly simple and basic thing, but we can get arbitrarily we can get arbitrarily complex with that as we want. You can also do something very simple with this DLL and just say, oh gosh, which company is ALF key? Well, maybe I should call up the contact person, and we can go into that database and pull out, maybe who the contact owner for it. We put it in a message box, which maybe isn't the most elegant way to display it, but you can call up that person and find out what's going on with the company. So one of the really interesting things about the database lookup sample we include the SDK is that it's fully configurable, and it's a really good starting point if you want to develop your own database lookup recognizer. So I'm going to take a look at the configuration XML for that database sample, and from there you can kind of get an idea of what the capabilities of it are. So at the top, of course, it's just your average XML schema. One of the things that's a little misleading is that, for example, it says recognizers and then it has recognizer underneath it, which implies that it's you can support multiple recognizers. I don't think in the case of recognizers I support multiple recognizers, but I figured if we're going to do the XML schema for it, we want to make sure that if we wanted to do it in the future, we can support it. Side note. So anyway, at the top of this DLL, we can specify some metadata about this recognizer, the name for it, the smart tag type, which is of really critical importance if you want to build other DLLs on your own that interact with this recognition that you're doing. And here's the section where I talk about how to do recognition. First of all, I give it a name, Northwind customer IDs, and this is actually the text that will show up in your tool's autocorrect dialog, and also a description. Beneath this is your standard ADO connection information. We have a connection string which basically looks for the Northwind sample database that gets included with Access and is on your Office 10 directory. And we also specify a table name, customers. This is really just passing these parameters on to ADO, and you can also specify SQL strings if you'd like, and use that flexibility. Now, of course, we don't want to do recognition on the entire table for customers. So what we allow you to do is specify just a targeted field name within that table that we should do recognition based on. Of course, if you do a SQL statement, you can also pare it down to one column if you'd like. So in this case, we're going to say, let's just recognize customer ID. You could easily specify customer name or any other field that you're interested in. So that's basically how recognition works. It's really easy to configure. Actions are also similarly easy to configure. You'll see down here that here's an example of an action. Now at the top, the first thing that we do is we specify a connection again. Now in most cases, you probably want to connect back to the same database that you did recognition on, but it certainly is possible you could get information for performing your action from another database. So we specify the connection information, and beneath that we say, okay, how do we map the smart tag's value, which is ALF key in the case I mentioned, to a record in the database? How do we build our select from query in such a way that we just get one record back that we can do further actions on? So we say, hey, use the smart tag value and just map it to the customer ID. So do a SQL query based on that. Now, once we've gotten that one record back, which represents your customer ID, your customer record, you can specify which fields to insert. So this works really well. You can just add multiple fields. So if you want more than just customer name, you can really specify it. Oh, another thing I wanted to point out is that we support two types of actions with this sample DLLs. Inserting data, which I showed you, and also showing related data in a message box. So you can specify these in the type strings. So that's really how you can configure the DLL, and that's kind of fairly useful. Let me show you very briefly how it's implemented. Again, it's really kind of a testament to COM that you can just build this DLL, and the code for it is very simple. In fact, the bulk of it is just doing some XML parsing on that. So if you look at the iSmartTag action, you'll see basically what we do is some basic initialization. And here we do a lot of XML loading, and we try to be very good about making sure we handle error cases, things like that. But basically what we're doing is building these data structures. In the case of actions, we build a data structure called data action. So if you specify 6 actions, we have 6 data action objects. And those, of course, encapsulate how to perform the action. So we're just basically reading the XML here and building up these objects. And we basically, then of course, when it comes down to querying these properties, we ask these smart tag action objects to return their names and their captions. And finally, when it comes down to the invoke verb action, we basically just say, hey, call this action object and let it invoke itself. Of course, thus the real magic is in the data action object, where we have all our logic for saying, okay, here's how I'm going to insert data. I'm going to go call ADO. I'm going to go find that record in the database, and then I'm going to insert that into my document. One of the interesting things here is that we do have an application pointer for writing back into the document, but that's a really good thing because it allows you to do really interesting features, and is a real selling point. But of course, if you get a pointer to the object model, in Excel you get a pointer to the range object that was fired upon. In Word you get a pointer to the text range object that was fired upon. It does mean that you have to do a little bit of special casing because inserting data into Word is a lot different from inserting data into Excel. So we do a little bit of special casing in that case. Recognition is fairly simple. We basically also develop these objects called data caches. And what these have is basically all the get sets for command text and for connection string. At one point, we actually build our ADO object, which connects to the database and extracts the records that we're interested in. And finally, the iSmartTag recognizer will just call this thing and say, does this term exist in the scripting.dictionary that we're using to store them? Well, it'll basically use the scripting.dictionary exists functionality, and then that's all there is to doing recognition. So you can see that there's really no hard algorithms here. It's just very straightforward, and now we've got a very powerful recognizer that's configurable and will work with databases. Question?
Will the data source be a multi-dimensional database like I mentioned?
No, we're just using ADO record sets here, so it's relational databases.
Question. What happens if a term is recognized from two different contacts, like the vendor and the customer at the same time?
That's a good story. I'll get to it at the end. I'll answer that again. So, if I go back to the PowerPoint, I'll just wrap up. So moving forward, we're really looking for customers to develop really great smart tag DLLs because we fundamentally believe that the most interesting smart tags that you can get on your machine are the ones that are specific to your business needs. For every company, like for every RAID database that exists at Microsoft, there's another database of critical business importance at another company that you can really mine some interesting smart tags out of. I mentioned that we're going to have a smart tag SDK. This is a really great package of documentation, an API reference, and what the exact parameters mean, and also the samples that I mentioned in this demo, plus a Visual C sample and a tool for figuring out which actions you've got installed on your machine. So with that, I'll open up to questions. The first question I'll answer is, okay, so how do you handle multiple vendors trying to recognize some text? So in the case where, let's say, one company thinks MSFT is a stock ticker symbol and another thinks MSFT is a financial fund symbol, what they'll try to do is apply unique types to that run of text. So one will have a different type GUID that I showed you from the other one. And in that case, when that happens, what the applications will do is if there's actions for each one of those registered against each one of those types, it'll cascade the menu. And thus, it'll cascade the menu. So it'll look more complex, but one vendor's smart tag recognizer won't impact the way another one's fundamentally works. Question?
Based on that answer, is it going to, as we saw displayed up there, give the recognized type at the top of each subsection of that menu?
Yeah, so the way the flyout will work is it'll say stock ticker symbol as, oh, I'm sorry. The question was, okay, so if we recognize, a certain run of text as two different things, will we show like the friendly name for that type at the top, I think. And yes, we'll do that. Okay. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
I have two questions. Are we ever going to have our smart tags go to map point instead of Expedia, or have that as a choice?
MapPoint is developing a smart tag action set and recognizer that they will include with MapPoint 2002. So yeah.
When?
It's included with MapPoint 2002. I'm not sure when MapPoint 2002 is coming out, but I think it's fairly soon.
Thanks. And also, in Excel, or actually in Word, if you're on release candidate 1 anyway, maybe you can update me on this. if you paste a piece of an Excel spreadsheet in, apply formatting, the smart tag goes away. Is that intended to be that way? Is that a bug or a feature?
Smart tag goes away?
Yeah.
Oh, I think that sounds like a bug to me.
That's definitely a bug.
Yeah, I mean, I know we've tested against it, and in most cases it works. Yeah, I'd
Okay.
like to see it if you've got sample information.
Okay, thanks.
Seems like a bug.
Before the next question, there's one thing I wanted to clarify from the question asked at the very beginning about the distribution story and whether you need to have Office to be able to use smart tags. I said that you do need to have Office since IE tag DLL, one of the essential components, comes with Office. But we are making that DLL redistributable. So if you deploy Office within your organization to, say, a subset of people, you can actually roll out IE tag DLL for use in Internet Explorer to the rest of the organization.
I got a question on security, and if I'm an IT person and I'm afraid that I'll get these rogue DLLs distributed that has inappropriate material, for example, is there going to be any control source or anything that will help me control that?
So smart tag DLLs have the same security model that COM add-ins have. So out of the box, there's two levels of security. There's the low, medium, high in Office, and then there's also a second flag called Trust All Installed. Now, the Trust All Installed flag is a way to say, if someone has installed a COM DLL that works with Office, we'll take that as an assumption that, hey, if they can install DLLs on their machine and modify the registry, that there must be some security to it. So I think out of the box in all applications, you're set to high, but also with Trust All Installed turn on. So that means that any smart tag DLL that you would install would generally work. Now, of course, you can turn that flag off, and then at that case, smart tags will adhere to the Office security settings. So if it's set to high, unsigned and untrusted smart tag DLLs won't run and won't load at all. And ones that are trusted, you'll get a dialog the first time that says, do you trust this? Those kinds of things. So yeah, it's really no different from COM add-ins fundamentally.
And once they're on your machine, how do you unload them?
There's some UI for turning off certain smart tags, but unloading them, yeah, is still the burden of kind of the smart tag provider. So if they provide an uninstall mechanism, then that's what you would use, which, yeah, is
There's one other thing worth pointing out, which is that you can use policy settings to disable the ability to follow the download URL. So if within an organization you decide, I don't want my users to get these things because I'm frightened of them, you can disable that, or you can redirect it to an internal site so that you have much more control that way over what sort of DLLs are getting onto your client's machines and prevent rogue DLLs from getting there.
This is a similar question to that. Is it possible to specify multiple download URLs so that if I want to specify an internal source for local users and an external source or some kind? How about, if I want to share documents that have specific smart tags with users outside my organization, how would I go about doing that?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's no solution for that right now. You get to specify a single download URL. So I guess in that case, probably the best solution would be to make it the external download site so that the people internally can get it as well. But then you do have these issues about what if my users internally aren't allowed outside the firewall for things and all that. That's a very good point and something we can consider for future versions.
Yeah, the download URL is a little better than the straight out of the box problem of installing COM DLLs. It's a little better, but we still realize that there's a lot of issues with it, and a lot of organizations you don't want users going to a download URL and installing things. So in those organizations, download URL really doesn't buy you much, but it's better than nothing. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes, when you use the recognizer to connect to a database to look up values there, how many can you put in there? So, for instance, if I was referencing an article number database, I can imagine that my article numbers are not like really normal values to you. You can do a recognizing, like you said, like 4 letters is a stock ticker symbol. So you go to a database to look up the values. So how big can this table be? How many values can go in there before your performance is like it's with every word you type and it's things like, oh, this could be an article number, goes to the database and is trying to recognize that.
Sure. So smart tag recognizers within the Office applications run in a background thread. So what this means is that as you use the application, your application's main thread is in focus, so the smart tag recognizers really don't run and they don't have a chance to run. So that said, what you see with smart tags is that generally, even if your recognition algorithm is fairly slow, you won't generally impact the user experience. Now, what you will impact is the performance of your peer recognizers. So if you have one recognizer that takes 10 minutes in iSmartTag recognizer recognize, then you won't see anything happen. And of course, there's also the question of if I go to an ADO database when I boot up and try to download a lot of terms, that might make my hard disk churn. And hard disk churn is just it's a critical resource, so that might slow down your application as well, even if it is a background fed. I mean, we do try to be smart about loading SmartTag DLLs on boot. We don't do it on boot. We do it a little bit after. So in general, you won't impact the Office experience, but yeah, there are ways you can. And in the case of database, I'm not sure exactly, in the case of the database sample, exactly what its scalabilities are. But to a large degree, a lot of these algorithms are dependent on how your algorithm is implemented. If you have 400,000 terms in a really slow search algorithm, there's not much.
It's better to create an algorithm for it to recognize it.
Yeah.
Right.
To be smart about it.
And the other possibility is, if you want to do recognition of something that's in a database, but you can filter out what you query against the database, like maybe article numbers follow a particular pattern, but not all of them are valid. So you could first filter and see, okay, unless it matches that pattern, I don't even need to ask the database.
Yeah.
That's not something supported in the sample, but it's something you could easily code up yourself to improve perf and cut down on the amount of information you send across the wire.
Hi. If I'm using Word and I'm trying to recognize the names in the Exchange cal, then what about the logon information, the credentials itself? Do I need to be logged into Outlook to get the names?
That's actually, our first thing was, wow, we can actually do recognition based on the global address list. That would be pretty cool, right? And they're like, oh, you have to log on to Outlook. And nobody wants to boot an instance of Outlook every time you boot an instance of Word or Excel. So for that reason, we do limited recognition based on names that are in your name cache. So as you use Word, it'll store like the names of people that you frequently communicate with. And we do we do recognition based on that because that's just a flat file that gets stored to disk. But yeah, it's an interesting question. I could see developing a DLL that does communicate with Exchange, but yeah, you'd have that performance implication, and that certainly was something we didn't want to bite out of the box. But yeah,
you'd almost certainly need to do some caching in order to do
that.
Yeah. Store it on the client every morning, and then update it later the next morning or something like that.
That's right.
Yeah, that's not something we have a solution for today in the Office box.
Okay. One more question: can I smart tag enable my own container?
There's really no support that we have for smart tag enabling your own container, but on the other hand, if you look at it, smart tags are basically two interfaces, iSmartTag Recognizer and iSmartTag Action. And if you know smart tags well enough and how they work, it's fairly straightforward to figure out how you could communicate on your own to iSmartTag Recognizers and iSmartTag Actions. I've actually got a demo sample. If you email me, Mike AM, I can send you, which is basically a text box where you type in bug1234, and it'll give you the actions that work with it. So it's a very simple sample, but it shows you that it's fairly easy to implement in your own container. The tricky issue for Word and Excel is that we do the background thread stuff. We do, okay, we're going to throw some chunks over the wall to them, and then we're going to sync back up with it. And that's where a lot of the complexity comes in. But using them simply isn't too hard.
Thanks. Okay, so we're going to cut down. Okay. Can you switch mics real quick? Am I on? Okay. I'm going to let Jeff and Mike move on, and they are also, I just want to remind people, they are here tonight. I think Jeff is. I don't know if Mike is.
Yeah, definitely am.
Anders Brown and I are. Yeah.
And Anders. And they'll be here for Ask the Experts tonight, and you can catch them out in the lobby here after this event. A couple things. There is another session that runs during lunch, and there are tables in that session. So if you grab a lunch, you can go over there. There'll be a table to sit down and have lunch at. One other thing on the deployment workshop that I mentioned earlier is that it is not here at the Sheraton. It is actually over at the Hilton. I just want to remind people of that. It starts at 8 a.m. tomorrow. So you will miss, if you decide to go that, you will miss the half-day sessions that are here. But for those that are signed up, you're all ready to go over there. For those that want to attend that, we're taking up to about 35 more people. You need to be registered. Don't just show up tomorrow at the Hilton, because if you're not on the list, you won't get in. Okay? Thank you.